On November 28th of 2008, a Walmart in Long Island, New York was preparing for the retail chain's biggest and most profitable night, Black Friday. Over 2,000 eager customers lined up outside while employees inside the store mentally prepared for their busiest night. Black Friday sales always caused a stir, with families rushing to get the lowest deals on anything from household appliances to bath towels. That year, Walmart was offering deals on HD TVs. One of Samsung's latest innovations, a 50-inch plasma screen originally priced at around $2,000, was on sale for $800. HP desktop computers were on sale for $400, a roughly 40% knockdown from the original asking price. Specials on DVDs, digital cameras, vacuum cleaners, you name it. Walmart had a special name for these events. Blitz Day, acquired from the German word Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning attack, had come to describe a sudden and overwhelming ambush. That night, an employee by the name of Jimtai Damore was asked by his boss to maintain crowd control when the doors to the store were to open. Damore, standing at 6'5", was the only person guarding the door and was expected to somehow control a rabid crowd of over 2,000 shoppers. Before the doors could open, the surging crowd broke down the barrier and flooded the store in an angry swarm, knocking Damore down in the process. As customers ran in, they stepped over his body, crushing him under the weight of the door he was told to guard. Even as other employees tried to step in to control the crowd and get people away from him, the crowd continued. Eventually, paramedics arrived and began CPR to resuscitate him. In a cell phone video recorded by one of the customers, Damore's body could be seen laid out in the front of the store, broken glass surrounding him, and as his limp body remained unresponsive to any and all attempts to resuscitate, some customers could be heard in the background, laughing. The night would end with Damore pronounced dead at the scene. The tragedy would spark an investigation into Walmart. The Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission found that Walmart had failed to provide a safe working environment for Damore. A 9-month-long investigation would lead to Covette Rooney, an administrative law judge, siding with OSHA and ultimately agreeing that the tragedy could have easily been avoided if Walmart had taken proper precautions. For the failure to protect the life of their employee, Walmart was fined $7,000, which the company, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, refused to pay, and continually appealed until 2015. Walmart changed the name from Blitz Day to The Event, and a co-worker of Damore's, when interviewed by the New York Times, lamented his senseless death and said, "It was crazy. The deals weren't even that good." Looking back on this story, the thing you come away with is that greed is rampant and ruinous. Damore died not just because of improper protocol or protection, but because of corporate and consumer greed. Walmart was at fault for cutting corners. Instead of preparing for their busiest night with a proper security outfit, it came down on the shoulders of one man who hadn't even been trained for that. Their refusal to pay for the protection of their employees was evident. Then there was the greed of the customers, rushing inside to snatch up TVs and computers. The overvaluing of objects was on full display that night. To both the company and the consumers, the things being bought and sold inside the store were more precious than a human life. When human beings can act this horrifically, the explorations we see of this kind of greed and selfishness in the horror genre doesn't even come close. Horror has always been a great genre for exploring the deep-seated fears and/or flaws of society. When we critique an aspect of our culture, it's because we can see the flaw in its thinking or in its execution or simply how it could all go wrong. And what better genre to explore those possibilities than with horror? Science fiction, but that's another topic. Part of the reason that the term elevated horror doesn't make sense to me and grinds my gears as much as it does is because its existence notions that the horror genre has never highlighted or critiqued social issues. No one uses elevated when talking about Larry Cohen's The Stuff, a film about what happens when a new food product starts taking America by storm. It was silly when it came out, dubbed campy over time, and make no mistake, it is silly and campy, but it also offers commentary on consumerism and the American lifestyle. If, by definition, elevated horror differentiates itself by offering something substantial to say about the world, why then is a campy yet commercial film like The Stuff not in that same category? I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It's because people are snobs. That is all. Going back as early as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, horror has always reflected the culture it was created in, including its anxieties, its consequences, and its failures. Frankenstein does not exist in a society without the Age of Enlightenment and the advent of experimental procedures in science. Shelley advocated for the acquisition of knowledge and believed in the wealth it could offer one, not just financially, but spiritually. But she cautioned against the idea that man was infallible, or that advancements in science could be the answer to all of our woes. Shelley essentially said,
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should.
J. Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, a gothic vampire novel predating Dracula by 25 years, does not exist without the societal fear of female sexuality. Octavia E. Butler's Kindred, widely deemed to be a science fiction novel whose horror-esque elements are simply unignorable, does not exist without the condemnation of racial injustice and slavery. Even something as schlocky as the Amityville Horror is not without its own reflection of societal values, as it, be it intentionally or unintentionally, has parallels to the economic crisis of the 1970s. When you're telling stories in your part of the world, those stories are naturally going to reflect your part of the world, including your politics, your beliefs, your anxieties, etc. And that's not to say that all horror movies have that extra layer of subtext, or that they need to have that subtext in order to hold value. Sometimes a pipe is just a pipe, and a slasher is just a slasher. Other times, well, you get George Romero making a zombie flick because he wants to talk about how obsessed Americans are with buying stuff. When George A. Romero started writing Dawn of the Dead, it was a response to the development of a huge shopping mall in western Pennsylvania, one of the first of its kind, and for Romero, who had lived in West Pennsylvania all of his life, it was fascinatingly dystopian. Upon visiting the mall before it was due to open, the director was struck by its physical enormity and even more so by what it represented.
It was one of the first indoor malls in the country. That gave me the idea. I said, this is a perfect way to do another film, have people trying to escape the living dead, and they wind up in this shopping mall, this consumer paradise.
Dawn of the Dead is one of the most well-known and easily identifiable zombie movies ever made. It, along with Romero's first feature, Night of the Living Dead, has become the blueprint for the eat-your-brains genre for decades. Its influence on films like The Evil Dead, 28 Days Later, and Get Out is incomparable, and the artistry of Romero is embedded into the very fabric of horror as a whole. The film came out in 1978, and its themes were eerily foretelling of what would come to be synonymous with the succeeding decade. By the 1980s, we would see a sharp rise in popularity of the shopping mall. Consumption had reached new heights thanks to people having more disposable income and too much time on their hands. Adults helped to push the market, but it was teenagers who ran it. The 1980s was the age of malls, MTV, and navel-gazing. The opening scene of Amy Hecklering's Fast Times at Richmond High isn't just entertaining and toe-tapping, but it also captures a very specific moment in history regarding the pastimes of American youth. In 1987, postmodern artist Barbara Kruger created what would become her most famous piece of work, I Shop, Therefore I Am. What was intended as a critique of materialism ironically became a symbol of materialism, with self-proclaimed shopaholics and mall rats wearing the image on t-shirts, bags, and pins. In an even more disturbing turn, Kruger's distinctive style was later co-opted by James Jebbia to create the Supreme lifestyle brand. Kruger's Condemnation became an endorsement overnight. Watching Dawn of the Dead in 1978, it must have been insightful, but watching Dawn of the Dead today, it's almost unsettling how relevant it is. In the movie, a group of survivors take up shelter in a shopping mall as the government collapses around them due to the undead roaming free. The mall gives them enough food and water to sustain themselves, and they have as much entertainment as they could possibly want or need, perhaps even more. In the mall, they get to live an almost hedonistic lifestyle, while the world they once knew crumbles on the outside. The undead are drawn to the mall as well. At one point, two characters watch as the undead roam purposelessly inside the mall, and we get this exchange.
What are they doing? Why did they come here?
Some kind of instinct, memory of what they used to do. This was an important place in their lives.
The horror of Dawn of the Dead, of course, comes from the violence, the devolution of society, and the ugliness of human nature, but there's an undercurrent of unease at the idea that all we do in our lives is buy things we don't need, to such an excessive extent that after we die, our memories will have all to do with what we owned and where we got them. Tyler Durden has some problems, but he really ate when he said,
"The things you own end up owning you."
Dawn of the Dead arriving to the world in 1978 was the perfect preview to what would come to characterize the 1980s.
How the hell are we gonna get back? Who the hell cares? Let's go shopping first.
Dawn of the Dead depicted a dystopia where a shopping mall was the beacon of hope, of life, and even survival. By 1982, the popularity of malls would reach its peak and the economy would reach a brief level of economic prosperity that made buying the most popular pastime. If Dawn of the Dead was a warning prologue to the 1980s, John Carpenter's They Live was the scathing epilogue. They Live, first and foremost, is not a horror movie. Let's immediately get that out of the way. It's a science fiction action film that's as prophetic as it is silly, and the only reason it gets lumped in with horror movies is because the GOAT John Carpenter made it. The reason I include it here is because I don't think this video would exist if not for They Live. While it may not be a horror movie in the traditional sense, the world it takes place in and the lore of it all evokes an unsettling feeling that gets under your skin. What if your world is not real? What if you were asleep? If we want to get more technical than that, They Live, according to the writer-director, is not even science fiction. It's a documentary.
Do you think the film has still some relevant social commentary?
Oh, that's never ended. That's still with us. They Live is a documentary about what's going on now.
Based on the short story 8 o'clock in the morning by Ray Nelson, They Live has been described as a big fuck you to corporate and government greed, to the wealthy, and more than anything else, a fuck you to Ronald Reagan. They Live was my fuck you to Ronald Reagan and everybody in the 80s loving that old wrinkled piece of shit. He fucked up everything. Tell us how you really feel, John. They Live begins with an outsider arriving in California looking for work. All of the jobs in his hometown of Denver, Colorado has dried up, so he ends up joining a commune of people who migrated to California looking to make a living. One of the first things we hear in the opening scene is after he arrives to a work placement program, and over the intercom, a woman announces that they are no longer accepting applications for food stamps. Meanwhile, the TV sell the idea of luxury, and they work in a city where the wealthy waste their days shopping for things they don't need. They Live observes class disparity and economic injustice, as well as the idea that entertainment can serve as a distraction from very real issues. In both the short story and the film, TVs are dangerous as they spout off the same hypnotic messages, keeping everyone docile. Obey, consume, don't question authority. Entertainment offers escapism, yes, but in excess it becomes a prison of ignorance.
Sometimes when I watch TV, I stop being myself and I'm the star of a series or I have my own talk show, or I'm on the news getting out of a limo, going someplace important.
There were no aliens on the subway for some reason. Maybe they were too good for such things. Carpenter describes the film as a reaction to what he saw during the span of the 80s, greed and selfishness.
We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain.
I just want to pause for a second to say that this movie becoming a favorite for ultra-right conservatives is so funny. How can people who consider the idea of wokeness to be a major flaw in society unironically enjoy a movie where the recurring theme is that people are asleep to the atrocities of the world and that they need to wake up, that they need to stay woke? You can't make this shit up, I swear. This focus on our own gain at the expense of the well-being of ourselves and others is ironic when we consider the possibility that, in some ways, our desire for worldly things is really a desire for identity and belonging. When our main character becomes aware that something suspicious is going on, his world is changed forever. The commune he resides in is also home to some revolutionaries trying to wake people up to the dangers surrounding them, to the knowledge that their world isn't real. It's these revolutionaries who invent a pair of glasses, well, a bunch of glasses, that help to see the world for what it really is. Only when the glasses are on can they see the alien-like figures surrounding them. Only when the glasses are on can they see the messages and the advertisements that surround them for miles and miles. Everything beckons them to stay asleep, to obey, and to consume. Carpenter added a little touch to this element that I just find to be very insightful. You see, the longer you keep the glasses on, the more painful it becomes. You get headaches, your eyes have this sharp pain behind them, you feel hungover, but hungover turned to 11. The price we pay for this awareness of our world is living with great discomfort. It would be so much easier, so much more comfortable to just take the glasses off and live blissfully ignorant of all that is wrong with the world. Keeping them on is harder. In the aftermath of 9/11, President George W. Bush addressed the nation. In a time of shock and unspeakable devastation, American citizens looked to him for answers, for reassurance, and for a semblance of hope. In his address, Bush acknowledged the hard work of the emergency response team, mourned the loss of lives, offered prayer, and quoted Psalm 23 from the Holy Bible. He also encouraged Americans to not allow the tragedy to prevent them from spending money.
Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well.
Although this gesture was widely interpreted as a call for solidarity and not allowing the, quote, terrorists to win, it was also a call to action. American airlines were struggling, morale was low, and the way to boost it was to remind Americans that buying things was equivalent to patriotism. If you really are an American, if you really love America and support your country, you'll go shopping, you'll go to Disney World, you'll buy t-shirts bedazzled with red, white, and blue, and you'll be proud to be an American. Companies quickly followed suit, turning the tragedy into an opportunity to encourage Americans to buy more things and to keep the economy booming. In 2021, writer Emily Stewart penned an essay for Vox detailing just how rampant patriotic consumerism became following 9/11. She writes, "Political leaders declare that the terrorists hate our freedoms of religion, of speech, and, apparently, of the ability to snap a picture with Minnie and Mickey and buy stock in Exxon. Corporate America, naturally, was happy to oblige. General Motors advertised that it would keep America rolling with interest-free financing. Ford followed suit, pledging to do their part to move America forward by offering the same deal. The country saw a proliferation of American flag-themed merchandise. The national catastrophe could be commodified, packaged, and sold for profit. Was it exploitative? Maybe. But participating in that exploitation, as long as you were spending, was reaffirming the American way." Following 9/11, consumption became the ultimate display of American pride. Your shoes, your clothes, your products, your car, all American made, all red, white, and blue. Post-9/11 consumerism is just one example, though. One example of an oft-recurring theme in consumption. What you buy says a lot about your values and your morals. We buy not just what we believe in, but we buy what we want to be, who we want to be. The link between consumption and identity is intrinsic. Sometimes we buy simply because we are longing for connection, and in today's age, I find that to be the truest it's ever been. Despite how small our world has become, we can reach out to people across oceans in the time it takes to blink. Our sense of community and connection is worse than it's ever been. A widespread loneliness has overtaken millions of us, and most of us will remain lonely because we no longer know how to connect with other people. In the absence of belonging, we seek out things that we think could get us closer to having some sort of camaraderie. In Bell Hooks' All About Love, she talks briefly about consumerism and its role in the epidemic of loneliness. Buying things is a way to align ourselves with certain morals, to attain a certain status, to be viewed as desirable or important by people we deem to be desirable or important. She makes the case that consumerism and greed cannot exist without loneliness and a desperation to find a purpose. Writing, "Intense spiritual and emotional lack in our lives is the perfect breeding ground for material greed and overconsumption. In a world without love, the passion to connect can be replaced by the passion to possess." In Child's Play, the cult classic turned enduring phenomenon, Andy, a 6-year-old boy, is a really big fan of the Good Guy TV show. Being raised by a single mom, Andy is self-sufficient and maybe even a bit lonely because of it. When we first see him, he's watching TV and making breakfast. The way Andy engages with the Good Guy TV show, wearing the same clothes as the character and looking at the TV longingly, just expounds his connection to not only the show, but to the idea of having a close friend like the ones depicted in the series.
And I'll be your friend to the end.
It's clear that Andy's desire to have the Good Guy doll goes beyond wanting a material possession. It's about not wanting to be alone, wanting to have a friend, and someone who can be with him during the times that he has no choice but to be hyper-independent. Sure, Andy is a child, and children tend to be more susceptible to marketing than anyone else, but you can't deny that Andy's longing for a material possession is really a longing for some kind of human connection, and I'd argue that for most of us, in our lust for accumulating things, we're really trying to satiate an emptiness. The Stanley Cup craze is the most recent example. Owning a Stanley Cup wasn't so much about being hydrated or sustainable. It was about status. It was about community. If you had a Stanley Cup and you included it in your pictures and videos on social media, people would know that your status was one to be envious of, that you belonged to a sect of people that had purpose and perhaps even power. Child's Play is not a straight-up condemnation of consumerism, and the film series itself isn't so much about that, but its existence is a reflection of the culture and the time it was made in. A culture of the mall-going boom and t-shirts that read, "I can't be overdrawn, I still have checks." The concept itself, that of a single mom desperate to buy a new toy for her son, is also reminiscent of the famous Cabbage Patch craze of 1983.
Things have reached such a point that this store in Clifton, New Jersey has set up a Cabbage Patch trading post. They decided it doesn't matter much that the doll retails for $21 if you can't buy one. So they'll pay you $40 for any Cabbage Patch doll you bring in, and then they'll turn around and sell it for $50.
Take it or leave it. Somebody else will buy it.
I'll take it. Karen, it's too much money. No, it isn't. You have no idea how much Andy wants this doll.
In this stuff, we really love the stuff in this house, don't we? A mysterious goo becomes a hot commodity. The sweet treat that was first discovered bubbling out of the ground quickly replaces ice cream in popularity and soon becomes the only product on the shelves at grocery stores. Commercials promoting the stuff are almost hypnotic.
It's called the stuff. And believe me, enough is never enough.
The stuff, the taste that makes you hungry for more.
And absolutely no one questions the product. What's in it? Is it good for us? Where did it come from? Who cares when it'll make us millions, when it tastes this amazing? The film is spotted with a few skeptical characters. Our main character, Mo, an industrial saboteur hired by an ice cream company to look into the stuff, find out the ingredients, and who's pushing it. Then we have a character, Jason, a young kid who watches helplessly as his family becomes addicted and dependent on the product. By choosing these two characters to focus on, we get a glimpse at the corporate aspect of the product, engaging with the executives making the big decisions and the choices behind its advertising, as well as a closer look on how the product affects families once it enters their household. The stuff also has the best tagline. Simple but curious enough that you want to know more. Are you eating it, or is it eating you? Fucking love that shit. Spoiler alert, it's eating you. It's eating your whole insides out. The stuff is actually some sort of alien substance that consumes its host from the inside out, taking control of their brain and feasting on their insides. By the time that's found out though, it's much too late and the product is everywhere. The stuff is basically Invasion of the Body Snatchers if instead of coming down on a spaceship, the aliens came down as food and caused the least amount of concern. The stuff, like many movies of its kind, is a bit silly, but that's part of its enduring charm. It aims first and foremost to question the practices that led to products being greenlit even when they're not safe to consume, and how corporate greed leads to unsafe practices that end up being devastating for everyone involved. Something I love about the stuff is that its analysis on greed is not just on the shoulders of faceless corporations and the extremely wealthy. It also showcases how many of us can be driven by greed. I mean, the main character will be on the right side of history undoubtedly, but even he recognizes that the driving force behind his actions has all to do with greed.
You know why they call me Mo?
No, why?
Because every time people give me money, I always want more.
I wouldn't say the stuff is as transparent as Child's Play in relating the pursuit of things to a pursuit of connection, but there is one line in the movie that ties into that. There's a scene where Jason's family forces him to eat a container of the stuff, telling him that it is only after he's finished that he can actually be part of the family again.
Now you stay in your room until you finish that. Then you can become a part of the family again.
Fortunately for Jason, this tactic doesn't work, but it's a tactic we've seen before. Consume this thing and you too can be a part of something valuable and loving. Anyway, what I love most about this movie is that it does not exist without some guy seeing a weird substance bubbling from the ground and deciding to taste it. Absolutely unhinged behavior. Thank you for your service, sir. A lot of the movies I cover here are from the 1980s, but I think they all have a prevailing relevance and we can see those themes play out in real life all the time. There were plenty of movies I didn't go into here. Most were cut for time, but I do suggest looking into films like In Fabric, and I'll put another list in the description. When I initially thought about this video, I fully intended on talking about Thanksgiving, but for personal reasons, I would rather not highlight it. Anyway, thank you to my patrons, and thank you for watching this video.
I've lost 5 pounds already this week, and I've never felt better. Why are you talking like you're on a commercial?